Hey everyone, this is Waleed Yousif, and today we're talking about how does owner-to-owner financing work. What is owner-to-owner financing? So owner-to-owner financing is when the person who's selling the home finances the purchase to the buyer. So if we illustrate this, basically it would be as follows. So let's just say if we have a seller here, right? And let's just call him Johnny, right? So we have Johnny here as a seller, house, right? So this is the house, and we have a buyer, right? So we have a buyer here, and let's just call him Frank, right? So this is buyer here. So basically is this, the seller is selling the property, the buyer is on the market to buy a property, right? So for the traditional, what happened is that the Frank as a buyer would go to a traditional bank to get the loan. So let's just have this one, right? So let's just say, okay, so this is bank, let's just say it's Wells Fargo, right? So then what happened is that Frank as a buyer would apply for a loan to buy the property. So what happened then, the bank has requirements for Frank, and one of those requirements are as follows. So one, they have to check the credit, right? So they have to check the credit for it. They have to check the income. They have to, obviously they have to do the appraisal. They have to do the appraisal for the property. They would have to see the payment history for Frank. Basically, he made the payments on the past on, let's just say, car or another purchase. The asset, right, that Frank has, if he has other properties or just this one. Other thing would be fees that he has to pay, would be like, so origination fees and other host of fees that the buyer would be responsible for getting the loan for that. So basically, as you can see, is that Frank as a buyer would have to apply for the bank and get qualified with the requirement that the bank has. So that would be credit. That will check the credit, see if his credit score is good enough to qualify for that loan. Also the income, the type of income that has, is it self-employed, W-2, what type of income he has. Also the appraisal, right? So the bank would hire an appraisal for the house to see if it's worth what the seller is selling it for. So basically the bank would want also to secure themselves about the price that they're lending money on. So that's another one. Also the down payments, right? And also the monthly payment as well. If Frank as a buyer can afford the monthly payment for the house, because they want to make sure that he as a buyer can pay them back the monthly, as well as the down payment, right? Obviously they have something where seasonal, so they have to have it for a season of time as a down payment, so they make sure it's his down payment, or basically the buyer down payment. The asset, what type of asset that Frank, again as a buyer, has during that transaction, as well as fees, right? So there are a lot of fees, origination fees and other host of fees that the bank require the buyer to pay for those fees. So as you can see, it's really difficult to get qualified for a loan. So in the last statistic between 2021 to 2022, the origination close-end loans were decreased by 40%, right? So if we say, okay, 10 people would apply for a loan, then they would have to go through all the requirements. Basically, 6 of them would get qualified and 4 of them would get disqualified. So you would have four people out of 10 would not qualify, would not get the house that they're looking for. All right, so now that we don't have the bank involved in the process, so how does owner financing work? So we still have the seller, we still have the buyer. Seller is selling this property for $250. Frank, as a buyer, is still looking for a property. Obviously tried the bank, the traditional, and didn't get qualified for a loan. And now what we have on owner-to-owner financing is what's called a promissory note. So would have the principal, right? The $250, the purchase of the house, right? The purchase of the house, the interest rate, right? What's the percentage of the interest rate that the seller is charging the buyer for that? Also the schedule of monthly payments, right? As well as would be the down payment as well. All right, so that's what it's involved here. Is the promissory note between the seller and the buyer. So this is get prepared by the attorney or title company. They would prepare that, and based on the agreement that is between the seller and the buyer for that property. So as you can see, the principal did not get paid by any mortgage company. What happened is that the seller here, Johnny, becomes the bank for Frank and finance the purchase, which is $250 to buy that property. And in that promissory note would have, as I said, you know, the principal, what's the interest rate they would have it. If there is a balloon, they would have when that would be paid, for the terms, for how long would that, is it 15 years, is it 30 years, is it 10 years? So that's the agreement between the seller and the buyer. What would be the monthly, and also what would be the down payment. So the property gets to the buyer, and the buyer would be responsible for the tax and insurance, the TI for the property, and this is what we would call it PI, right? So then basically would come up with PI, TI, right, where the buyer would be responsible to make that payment every month. And there would be like a service company where it would service the PI, TI, the PI would go to the seller, and the TI that would go to the insurance, taxes, and if there's any like HOA, that would also, other fees, so that would be also included in the monthly payment, where the service company will make that payment to all those parties. And also it will be stated the consequences if the buyer, Frank, in this point won't make payment for that property. So there would be a consequences which will be laid out on the promissory note if the buyer default on making payments on that note. So as I said, there is no transfer of the principal in this transaction. What happened is that the buyer, that's the agreement, the promissory note, which is the buyer repay that principal over time with making payments on that property. So now what we have Johnny as the seller and also as a lender, because financing the purchase to Frank, the buyer for the property, and hold the promissory note, which has all the requirement, as we said, the interest rate, the monthly payment, schedule of the payment, and the terms of the loan. And here we have the buyer, Frank, gets the property and get to live on the property. So that's basically how owner to owner financing works. Now that's how does owner to owner financing work. If you're interested in buying property owner to owner financing, feel free to reach us. We're currently selling a couple of our investment properties as owner to owner financing, and we'll be happy to show you those properties that we're selling them as owner to owner financing. Also, if you could like and subscribe to the channel, greatly appreciated. We will be pushing more content as owner to owner financing, so you will learn more about this strategy to buy a home as owner to owner financing. Again, this is Waleed Yousif with Sunbelt Cash Offer. Take care.